Shepherd Podcast. I'm your host, Pastor Jay, and with me, as always, my compatriot, my good buddy, Travis Welch.
I'm always here.
It's my second time with you, right?
Right.
But he's going to be with us this week and next week, and we're going to talk about a topic that is probably one of the most controversial things in any church today. The most controversial thing, evangelism.
Yeah, it shouldn't be, right?
It shouldn't be. It should. I mean, it's our divine calling to share the gospel. It should be our joy to share the gospel, and yet every church person I've ever talked to, pastors included, struggle with doing effective evangelism. And so we're going to do this two-part series on this, and this week we're going to talk about why is it so hard for church members to do evangelism? What is so difficult about evangelism that keeps us from doing it? And then next week we're going to kind of break that down on the practical side of things and kind of give some strategies for effective personal evangelism in our next session and part 2. And so I guess to start us off, Travis, why is it so hard for pastors and for church members to evangelize? What is our problem?
I don't know if it's all that controversial or not. We know we're supposed to be doing it, right? The Great Commission kind of stuff, we own up to all that, but we're fine as long as we're talking about it. The problem comes in the actually doing of it, and that's where we start running into problems. I don't know why it's so difficult for us. I know there's different things I've run into. I think sometimes maybe it's just a lack of concern some people have. Maybe we're not concerned that there's people going to hell and all of that, and we kind of look at ourselves sometimes. Well, that's not my gift. I'm not an evangelist or something, and so we kind of push that off to somebody else, the evangelism part to somebody else. But truth is, I'm not a gifted evangelist. I'm not an expert on evangelism at all. I'm more along the line of a pastor and teach and all of that. So I'm not an expert on anything, but I've got a responsibility to evangelize, and there's an accountability that comes on us as well to evangelize. And so sometimes I just don't think we take it serious. I don't think we have that concern or that burden that people, and maybe we need to do better about that. But then again, we can do a lot of talking, and might make a good sermon. You could preach a hell sermon or something that, but it doesn't necessarily result.
I'll tell you, one of the best sermons I ever heard, and I think it was at the evangelism conference, that they do in Oklahoma City, with the BGCO sometimes, and it was Dr. Anthony Jordan gave this great sermon, and I will forever remember it. I don't even remember all the points of it. I remember the opening illustration. He came out there talking about fly fishing. Fly fishing, when you go out and do this stuff. And he said a couple of years ago he got really interested in doing fly fishing, and so he did all the research online and all the magazines, and he studied up on it, and he found out what's the best rod and reel and lures and the best string and the best techniques, and he did all this training and stuff on it. And he bought the best vest, and he actually had all this stuff on the stage with him. He got on there and he put on the waders and the vest, and he had the hat, and he had he's putting all this stuff. I mean, this long, involved illustration about all this stuff that he did to get ready for it. And then he got down to the end and he said, do you know how many times I've been fly fishing? 0.
Right.
He says, that's how we are with evangelism. We can do all the training in the world. It's like you said, we can talk about it all day long. We can have the best sermons about it. We can do the best training. You can have the 5-step program, the Romans Road, the spiritual laws, whatever you want to do. But when push comes to shove, you just got to do it. Like Nike says, just do it.
Well, that's what's in James. James tells us to be doers of the word, not hearers only, deceiving our own selves. The deception is that just because we know something, somehow we equate that with doing it. We think just because we know it, we're automatically doing it. But there's a vast difference between knowing something and doing something. So I think for a lot of Christians, we've kind of deceived ourselves maybe into thinking that, we're doing that. We're doing it through our church or whatever. We give to Lottie Moon or whatever it is. We think we're engaged in evangelism and missions when we really, it's minimal for the most part.
Yeah, true enough. Well, and I just talked about Sunday, I was talking about giving and through the tithes, and I said, honestly, I would rather people not give money to like Lottie Moon and missions. I know that's going to be controversial. I would rather they not give money to those kind of things. I would rather they go on a mission trip.
Yeah, well, there's nothing wrong with that.
I mean, yeah, there's nothing wrong with giving them money, but I'm saying it's too easy to give money and not actually do missions.
Here, it doesn't cost that much really to think about it. Here a couple of years ago, I was talking to a pastor, and it was just like right at 2 years ago, I was talking to a pastor, and he was kind of lamenting. Their finances in their church were such that they were barely getting by, and one of his regrets was he actually said to me that we have not been effective at doing any kind of evangelism, and honestly, he said we don't have the money to do some type of evangelism and stuff like that. And I said, well, really, it doesn't cost anything to do evangelism. What is that? Freely you have received, freely give kind of a thing. It doesn't cost a whole lot. You just got to have an environment in which it's kind of encouraged and things. But it doesn't cost a whole lot to do evangelism. You just got to get out and do it. It's one person sharing with another person about Jesus and stuff. So the cost of evangelism is very, very minimal. And I think if I was down to my last few dollars or whatever, I'd spend it on gospel tracts or something. I would spend my last few dollars on tracts rather than Sunday school literature or something like that. But that's just kind of me. But it doesn't cost anything to do evangelism. You just got to get out and go do it.
Well, I mean, like you said, even tracts are cheap. I was looking on there. We're looking for some tracts for our trunk or treat thing going on here on the 31st, and because we're giving out candy. I was like, we can give out tracts too, and just those little business card type tracts. I love those things because you don't even have to open them up. They're just flip. It's real easy. Very, very good for our ADD generation.
Yeah, we might talk about them when we get to the practical side.
Actually, we probably will, but anyway, I mean, like a pack of 100 is like $6. I'm like, $6. That's cheaper than going to McDonald's for a meal. You know what I mean?
It doesn't cost
much at all. But
I once saw a guy, and I don't know where it was. It was in Arizona, some kind of a conference or something. And the speaker, and I can't even remember who the speaker was, but he was in a big auditorium deal, and it was an evangelism emphasis. And he said, everybody who someone took the time to personally share the gospel with you. If you got saved because somebody shared the gospel with you, stand up. And practically everybody in the auditorium stood up. He said, okay, now sit back down. And the next thing he said, he goes, now, everyone who got saved by attending a service or a revival or something like that, stand up. Well, quite a few people stood up. But it wasn't near as many as what had stood up on the first question. And he said, okay, now everybody sit back down. And he said, okay, everybody that got saved at a crusade or something like that, stand up. And there was some, stand up. But the idea was there was getting fewer and fewer people were standing up. And then he said, how many people got saved because of a program you watched on television or through media or something like that? And there were people who stood up, but it was very, very few. And the point that he was trying to make was that, the most effective method still to this day is one person telling another person about Jesus. Mm-hmm. And you get all of these multimedia type of events that's going on, sometimes costing millions of dollars. And the point he was making was that with all the millions of dollars we're spending on evangelism, still the most effective method is one person sharing the gospel with another person, and it doesn't take any money.
Well, I was reading this article a couple months ago from, I don't remember who the scholar guy was now, but he was talking about, isn't it amazing that God uses something like preaching? Mm-hmm. In this day and age, with all the digital revolution and the social stuff that we have and like all the technology that we have, it's still one guy telling a congregation about Christ is the most effective way. And so it kind of made me think of that.
Well, and then beyond that, just lack of concern, maybe the other thing I can think, maybe the lack of know-how. We talk about it, but then how do we do it? And I think a lot of times we don't. People are kind of thinking to themselves, well, I don't know how to do it. I don't want to blow it. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. So maybe one of the other reasons why we're not effective at evangelism is that we just sometimes don't even know what we're doing and everything.
Well, I've preached on that before too, because I've had those same thoughts. And I mean, I remember still to this day one of my first ineffective methods of trying to witness to and it was a guy I grew up with in elementary school, and I'm in high school, and he became an atheist. And we kind of fell apart in junior high or whatever. We were good friends back in elementary school. And I remember him on the bus driving home, and I'm talking to him, trying to share the gospel with him. And he asked me one of those questions that atheists like to ask. And I think it was something like, God created everything, right? Well, where did evil come from?
Right.
And I was like, oh no. And it was like, and I was like, oh man, I've just been made a fool of. I made a fool of God. And it's like, I've just failed miserably. And of course now I know, that's a ridiculous thing. But I was preaching to the congregation a couple of weeks ago, and I was telling them, I was like, look, I hate the whole mentality of like, I don't want to mess this up. I mean, it's really kind of a dumb concept, because if you think about it, these people are lost and going to hell. Yeah.
Not like there's hell number 2.
Yeah, it's not like you're going to make it worse. They're already on the path to the worst possible thing. And I can't, was it Robert Vickery maybe in their church? I remember like last year, they were talking about their evangelism initiative, and it was something like something is better than nothing.
Right. Maybe.
And I love that, and that's why I brought that up too. I was like, something is better than nothing. If you give them just a piece of the gospel, it's better than nothing. Even if you can't get all the words right and you can't get everything perfect. And you also have to have some faith and trust that God's going to make it work. I mean, we're ineffective vessels. Let's be honest, guys. I mean, we're jars of clay. I mean, we have this secret, wonderful gospel within us, and we're worthless, jar vessels. And God takes that and uses that in a marvelous, mighty way. And we have to have faith that He can do that. If we don't have faith that He can do that, then we're just going to do nothing.
Yeah, you're not going to mess things up. You're not going to mess things up. There's no way you can mess up evangelism. And it's just basically just getting out there and doing it, and that's how you learn how to do it. You might, develop better techniques, or there's different approaches. There's a dozen different ways to go about sharing the gospel, and everybody's kind of comfortable with their own way of doing things. But the key is just get out there and start doing it, trial and error kind of thing, and you're not going to make their condition any worse than what it already is. Just get out there and do it, and just see what the Lord shows you.
What I want to talk too about, because you talked about just not a lack of concern for the lostness, and I mean, really, that's a lack of love.
It is.
And I've talked about that too, and the whole idea of like I can't remember who wrote it, but there was a book called Practical Atheist I read years ago, and it might have been Craig Rochelle maybe, but he talked about. We say we believe all these things, but we don't actually live like it. So we're basically practically living like atheists. We don't believe we say we believe in hell, but if we really believed in hell, we would be doing anything possible to keep people from going there. If we say we love people, but if we really love people, we would be telling them the truth about Jesus. I mean, we'd be knocking ourselves over trying to do it. As Spurgeon famously put, it's like, if people have to go to hell, let it be crawling over our dead bodies with our arms wrapped around their knees. Let no one go untold and unprayed for. And so, we live as practical atheists. And so that lack of concern really, really hits me because, well, I'm too busy. I've had my own things. And there have been times in my life where I felt the Spirit was saying, hey, go talk to that person. And I was like, no, I'd rather go check out in this line and get out of here, And so, there's always been those times, and I could still see the pictures of their faces, times where I really felt the Spirit was moving me to go talk to somebody, and I didn't, and it still haunts me. And I wonder, and I hope and pray that God is mighty and can do something through somebody else. And I hope that opportunity wasn't missed because I failed.
Well, we have failed. We have failed people. There's no doubt about that. But we need to have a burden for the lost, a concern that there are people going to hell. And we can do something about the equipping part of it. As far as training and all of that, those questions that your atheist friend have, there are a certain number of questions that pop up every once in a while when you're trying to evangelize, and they're designed to try to stop you or trip you up. You'll always have people ask those questions like, well, what about the heathen? What about those who've never heard the gospel? How can bad things happen to good people? There's certain things like that. People will come up and they're...
Oh, my favorite. Can God ever create a mountain that He cannot climb?
Yeah, but they're just really? They're thrown out there for diversionary purposes that somebody does. And so you kind of learn a little technique to bring them back on. Well, let's get it back to the personal aspect of the question. and try to bring it back to them. So there's training you can do.
Well, and
there's
that event is what
responses.
actually got me into apologetics, and so and the defense of the gospel. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's different things. We used to practice witnessing to one another. And one guy would act like the lost person, and the other guy would act like the believer trying to share, and the lost person would always try to trip the other guy up. But we practiced on one another doing that kind of stuff. But there's nothing beats just getting out and trial and error, doing it. God will show you some things. You'll grow in your methods and all of that kind of thing, and so it's all good. The other thing, even with all that, it all comes down to me anyway, and you mentioned this kind of too, is that, when the Lord tells you to witness to somebody and then you fail to do that, well, why do we not do it? And, a lot of times it's fear. Mm-hmm. That seems to be the number one thing that everybody thinks of, that the fear of man, the fear of failure, I don't know, but for the most part, for most of us, it's fear that kind of stops us from witnessing to people. Man, I don't know why that is. I don't have any idea, but that's the number one thing that seems to trip us up. But I think of, what's First Peter, when 2 Peter rather, he says, "I have not given you the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and a sound mind," kind of a thing. So the Lord's equipped us to get out and share the gospel. You shall be my witnesses. You shall receive power when the Holy Ghost has come upon you.
365 times in the Bible it says, "Do not be afraid."
Yeah. Don't let the Lord kind of carry you through this and show you some things and stuff like that. But fear seems to be the number one thing that keeps us. But some of those things, you find yourself if fear is your thing that stops you, the thing that takes away that fear is just going out and doing it. Or going in 2 and 3s. I think that's why the Lord sent the disciples out in 2s and 3s, because they draw encouragement upon one another, and in that 2 or 3, all of the gifts of the Spirit are going to be present in those 2 or 3.
That's a good point.
You heard those verses where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am, and all that. A lot of guys will kind of rip
one of the most misunderstood passages.
Yeah,
in the Bible,
but here's the deal: it's not that misunderstood. Yeah, you look at it in context; it's talking about church discipline. But the truth still remains. Yeah. But the thing about it is, it doesn't take 2 or 3 for the presence of the Lord to be there. And I've been in situations where there've been 200 or 300, and you couldn't find Jesus within 100 miles from the place. So, but when the Spirit of the Lord is in that, you'll find in 2 and 3 there's a strength there, and all of the gifts of the Spirit are going to be present. And so you can find encouragement by going in 2s and 3s, and things like that. And so.
That's why Jesus established the church, for that purpose, to give us that encouragement and edification to be able to do that.
Right. And you wouldn't believe how much strength you gain or how much courage you gain by just actually doing it. If you can get past that initial step, let's say the Lord wants you to go witness to somebody, and you've come up with every reason in the world why you can't and everything like that, and the Lord tells you, "I want you to go knock on their door," and I can't kind of a thing. But as soon as you take that first step, you knock on that door, all of a sudden the fear just goes away. And then they answer the door, the conversation starts, the Holy Spirit leads it. You just look for your opportunity to put the gospel in. One time I was on an elevator in a hospital, and we were coming down the elevator, and I felt prompted to give everybody in the elevator a tract. And so we started going down, and I just couldn't do it. I sit there and I said, "Oh no, I just couldn't do it." And so when I got to the bottom, all of a sudden I kind of stepped out, and I turned around. I said something about, like, the Lord wants me to give you a witness, give you a tract. And so I just started passing out tracts to people. But I looked at it like they ignored me. They thought I was some kind of a nut. They walked out the elevator. And I thought to myself, you know what, that's it. I missed my opportunity. I still did it, kind of reluctantly, But if I would have done it when the Lord told me to, it would have been twice as effective as it was as me putting it off and doing it at the end. But I let fear stop me. in doing that. So most of the time, if I fail, it's going to be because there's some kind of hesitation to me, some kind of fear will come over me, and we just got to just get past that and do it.
Well, I have here in the last minutes that we're going to talk about today, this is from Greg Steer. I think that's how you pronounce his name, Greg Steer, from Dare to Share Ministries. And they actually their program is really awesome, plug for Dare to Share. They base it off the statistic that 85% of people who become Christians do so before they turn 18, 85%. And so they really focus on teaching and training teenagers how to be faithful witnesses in evangelism. And so Greg Steer says, here's the 5 reasons why evangelism is so hard. And the first one he says is because, number 1, it grates against social norms. Really, it pushes up against society. And he talks about when you say the words like proselytize or evangelize, it kind of brings up this negative connotations to society. And even in our ears sometimes, the idea of pushing your faith on someone else, because of course society that we live in now is very, they say they're tolerant. They want to be tolerant of all views, but they're actually anti-tolerant against Christians. But this whole idea that it's like, your faith is a personal thing and you should keep it to yourself and not try to push it. And that's the idea to push it on somebody else like you're some kind of, spiritual drug dealer. But so it's grating against these social norms. But that's exactly what we are doing. We are sort of pushing it on people, but it's not in a bad way because we're trying to give them the truth. We're trying to give them life. But all the words that you see in the Bible, in the Gospels, about Jesus proclaiming the gospel, the good news, evangelizing, is about advancing the kingdom of God. And so when you think about it, it's really evangelism. I'm going to have to preach a sermon on this. Evangelism is declaring war against Satan and his minions. And so that's part of the reason, we'll get to that in a minute, that's part of the reason why it is so hard, because Satan and his angels know that it's spiritual warfare and they're stopping you.
Oh yeah.
And so, but it's grating up against society, and of course the society that we live in now. But I mean, even in the 50s, when church and in the state kind of walked step in step, so to speak, here in America, I still don't think evangelism was all that easy back then either. It was just more of a socially accepted thing that people went to church, but it was still kind of a private thing. I remember my grandmother, bless her heart, I loved her. She was the sweetest person. Everybody loved her to death. But then, I later heard, that she said something like, your faith is personal. You don't share that with anybody else. And it's like, you missed it.
Yeah, don't talk about politics, religion.
Yeah, I was like such a wonderful, person that had inroads with, we go to the grocery store and we couldn't get out of there in an hour because there's 20 people I have to come talk to her. I was like, the opportunity she could have had to share the gospel, and I was like, that's always stuck with me. And so, and I think we all subconsciously kind of do this, like, oh, I don't want to push my faith on someone. Mm-hmm. So it kind of grates against those social norms.
I've had people say things, this is not the place to do that.
Yes.
This is not the place.
Yeah.
I was at a deathbed one time. A guy was dying. They called me in. And I knew him, but I didn't know him too well. And I'm there, and I see this guy. He's like, man, he doesn't have much life in him. And I start witnessing to him. I start sharing with him. And when I look up, everybody is mad at me. And even the hospice nurse and stuff that was there. And she said to me, this is not the place for that. And I'm looking, and I'm looking at it like, man, if this isn't the place for, where is the place?
Wow. But, well, I had a lady at the church I was at formerly that stopped coming to church because we were doing congregational prayer in the middle of the service, and which is something I would like to get going here again. And I went and talked to her, and she was like, I just don't believe the church is the place for prayer. And I was like, you know what, you're right. You probably don't belong in this church. I couldn't believe that.
That's crazy.
That's hilarious. Yeah, if the deathbed is not the place for the final, gospel presentation.
But you'll get that a lot. This is not the place for that.
Yeah, true enough. The second thing Greg says here is that it leads to awkward moments, and I'm kind of the king of awkwardness.
Yeah, you're awkward.
I'm pretty awkward. I'm an introvert. I'm socially awkward anyway, and I've told my people here, and they've seen it in action. I've been here long enough; they've seen me. But when I come into a situation where I expect to see people, I'm fine. I can, and one-on-one situations, I'm pretty good. I'm like I said, I'm an introvert, so big crowds of people, I'm more of a wallflower kind of guy than life of the party. But the most awkward times you will ever find me is if you run into me at Walmart, in a place where I didn't expect to see you. And you'll come up, hey, how you doing? I'll be like, hi, how are you? I'm going to go shopping now. I mean, I'm like the most awkward person in the world, but it's I don't know why. It's a weird thing. But evangelism brings up those awkward moments. It's like, it's like almost like a weird, funny stereotype, like a parody you see on TV. It's like, hello, I'd like to talk to you about Jesus Christ today. And it's like, oh no, those Jehovah's Witness people or something, and so we get these kind of images and these stereotypes about that, but it does make for awkward moments. And I like Greg says that if there was ever a position of director of awkward moments, it was Jesus. Because here he is talking, with the religious leaders, and he would say something, and everybody's like, crickets chirping. He was like, what?
Yeah.
And so there, but it's in those awkward moments that you're really starting to pierce, because you're getting past the, oh, hey, how about the weather today, and how about them Cowboys or Sooners or whatever,
right.
And you're like, hey, let's get to the real heart of the matter. And you mentioned something a little while ago. It made me think about about getting back on track, not getting sidetracked. It makes me think. I love the woman at the well in John chapter 4, the
right.
Samaritan woman, and it's like, man, the Samaritan woman tried to get Jesus off track. Like every sentence out of her mouth is like, well, you Jews believe that she's trying to bring him into some kind of theological debate about where the holy place of God should be, the mountain where they worship her in Jerusalem, and Jesus is like, yeah, that don't matter. Let's get back on track. Yeah. It's like, that's going to pass away. Let's get back to this. And it's like he just kept shooting right back to it.
Whenever the discussion starts to get personal, that's when the diversions and stuff start
right,
happening. So
exactly.
You got to bring it back to some kind of a personal kind of a thing. But you know what? It is awkward. We're all kind of awkward in those type of things. I'm envious of those guys who have the gift of evangelism, to where, it's just natural to them, no matter what the setting, where they're at, what they're doing, and things like that. I said, oh man, I wish I could do that. But I'm awkward in it as well. I stumble all over everything. But there are times, you might toss it out there and you think, well, I messed that all up. That's, went out there and died on the floor somewhere or something like that. But you never know, that little seed that was planted, God can use that and stuff. When we start trying to wax eloquent and everything, that's when we start making that even worse errors. And stuff.
Like I said, God uses the weak and the foolish
things
of
of this world to confound the wise.
Number 3 he has on here is it exacerbates, and that's a fun word, exacerbates our fears of being rejected. Which and he kind of gives this illustration of like, when you like a girl and you want to go ask her out at the dance in junior high, and your palms are all sweaty, and you're like, you want to dance with me? And it's like the whole idea, our fear is that they're going to say no, and it's going to hurt. And
Well, here's the deal: the fear of man is a sin.
Yeah.
Always has been, always will be. So the fear of man is a sin, but we overcome the fear of man through a fear of God. We're supposed to have a love and a fear for God, a reverence for God, and they're the opposite of the same coin. If you love Him, you're going to fear Him. If you fear Him, you're going to love Him, kind of thing. So they're equal motivators when it comes to sharing the gospel and things. But fear. The fear of man is a sin, and the only cure for it is to have a fear of God. Get out there and do it. Overcome those fears.
Well, and he quotes here, of course, Isaiah 53:3, talking about Jesus. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. As from one whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. If Jesus was willing to be despised and rejected by men for our sake, how could we do any less? We can't be afraid of men, like you said. We must be in love with God and fear, His judgment more so than other people.
It's kind of a sign you're doing something right sometimes too.
It really is, especially in this day and age.
You get out there and every once in a while somebody will be mean to you. They'll cuss you out, or they'll take your track and crumble it up and throw it on the ground, spit on it, and everything else. And man, it's like it hurts. But we can expect those type of things to happen. It's almost like it's a sign that we're on the right track when things like that begin to happen.
Number 4, it makes us realize how much we don't know, and we kind of talked about that earlier. Because we're afraid that we're not going to be able to answer, and it is a crime, really. It's a sin that we are so unable to articulate the basic beliefs of our faith. That speaks to
Well, as a blind guy, I was
illiteracy,
blind and now I see. You know, I was lost and now I'm found. It's just a simple testimony of what Christ has done in your life, and that's powerful in and of itself. And you know, the theology and stuff will grow around it. You'll get to the point to where you can maybe satisfy some of the questions that they have. I don't know. It doesn't seem like you ever satisfy those questions, but you got to turn it back to the heart matter and let the Lord start working on the individual's heart.
Well, and like you said, we're never going to know enough. I mean, I've you know, top 10 of my class and have 2 master's degrees from a seminary, and I always tell people, I was like, you know what, after all those years, I had 7 years of seminary. You know what I learned after all that? That I know nothing.
I know guys that's got PhDs in evangelism. How would you like to have that hanging on your wall?
But I mean, you know, you're never going to know enough. It's kind of like the old adage when I was doing karate. That's like, you know, you always think even if you're a black belt, there's always somebody that knows more karate than you do. So don't think you're something, you know. Was kind of the idea. But, you know, there's always going to be that knowledgeable person. And like I said, with the advent of the internet and the new atheist movement with Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris, all those guys, you know, there's a lot more literature out there. There's actually a book I saw recently, like how to make people atheists. I can't remember the actual title, but it's a how-to guide of how to convert people to atheism. It's a book that came out in the last couple of years. So I mean, with all this stuff, you know, you've got, like you said, all the ready-made things to shoot back. They're really just deflections to shoot back at you, and don't be afraid of saying, I don't know.
That's a good question.
It's like, but that doesn't matter, because let me tell you about Jesus. You know, you do like Jesus did with the woman at the well. It's like, yeah, that doesn't matter. Let's get back on track.
What about those guys in deepest, darkest Africa that's never heard the gospel? Well, that doesn't apply to you. You
don't live in deepest, darkest Africa. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. But I mean, even there, I mean, I've heard stories about, you know, missionaries talking about people that, you know, they go into a village for the first time that anybody's ever heard, and they're like, oh, God spoke to us in a dream and said that the white man was going to come, and you're like, yeah, I mean, that's some wild. I mean, God can do anything.
I think as pastors, here's the deal. That back on the pastors is most pastors are not gifted evangelists. You know, we're more gifted in the area of teaching and all of that, which is good, and so none of us are really what you would consider to be gifted evangelists. You know, we may be theologians and all that kind of thing, but that doesn't excuse us from getting out. But what I've discovered is if the pastor's not out there leading by example, if he's not going out evangelizing, passing out tracts, well, the people are not going to do it either. And once the pastor stops doing it, the people stop doing it. And so as pastors, we've got to keep that in mind. You know, we got to be out there encouraging it and out there with the people when they're doing it, and things like that as well. And if we can do that, that will spur our people more on to actually pick it up and do it as well. So in the church, it starts to fail in the area of evangelism. The pastor really has to pick it up himself and start doing it, and other people will catch on. It's contagious in a way. You want to try to create an atmosphere of evangelism where it's kind of celebrated. It's not necessarily a program or a sermon series or something like that. You just have to create that atmosphere, and it gets to be kind of fun. After a while, you know, it's got to be challenging, fun, and you just find a way to encourage one another and in it, and but that's what we got to work at, is just kind of creating that atmosphere of evangelism.
I remember at my previous church I was at, one of the first years I was there, and I remember one of the Sunday school classes came to me and said, hey, we want to start like an outreach program, and we're going to meet on Tuesday nights, you know, to do outreach for the community and stuff like that. And I was like super excited, because I was like, yes, we're going to like go out and, you know, door to door and, you know, and do evangelism. What they, like the first time we go there, what they really meant was they're going to have a fellowship meal together and hang out together and, you know, invite their neighbors to come maybe. And I was so like disappointed by that.
Yeah.
But anyway, okay, number 5, and we'll close out on this. The 5th reason he gives is because it's a demonic attack. I mean, you're putting Satan and his kingdom on notice when you're going to evangelize. You're plucking souls out of Satan's hand, and that's what spiritual warfare is. And evangelism is spiritual warfare. And so if you're gonna mess with the bull, you're gonna get the horns kind of idea.
Yeah.
And so you're gonna poke the sleeping bear, the lion, whatever, and it's going to cause problems. And so there's going to be that demonic attack. There's going to be oppression and spiritual oppression that's going to come upon you because of that. Because I mean, what is evangelism but spreading and advancing the kingdom of God? I mean, that's what Jesus came proclaiming. That actually is the good news. I mean, salvation's a part of it, but the good news that's being spread is like, hey, there's a new guy, there's a new king in town, and a new kingdom that's better than this worldly kingdom, and this is what we're coming to advance. That's beyond geographical lines on a map. It's beyond politics. It's beyond nations. It's like, this is the church, this kingdom of God that's going to spread throughout the whole earth, and it's going to usurp the authority of the spiritual powers of darkness and wickedness that, like Ephesians 6 say, that are in charge. And so I had this I thought was pretty good. He said, we need to know that, number one, non-believers are actually followers of the prince of air. Ephesians 2:1-2 says, you are dead in your trespasses and sins in which you previously lived according to the ways of this world, according to the ruler of the power of the air, the spirit now working in the sons of the disobedient. And so I like, you ever seen that movie The Matrix? With Keanu Reeves? All my movie references are lost on people. I'll tell you what.
I hardly ever turn the TV on.
Oh man, The Matrix, with Keanu Reeves and it's got Lawrence Fishburne. Anyway, the whole idea there is it's like a future science fiction thing, and this guy, he feels like there's something wrong in the world that he lives in. He's like just an office guy, whatever. He feels like there's something wrong, and then he meets this guy Morpheus that opens his eyes, so to speak, to see that he's actually just kind of like the brain in the jar kind of thing. He's like this body that's been plugged in and jacked into this computer system, and this whole world that he lives is just playing out in his brain. The real world is like this apocalyptic wasteland that machines and man fought years ago or whatever, and it's like in the future. Anyway, there's this one scene they go into and it's called The Matrix, this computer simulation that runs. It's called The Matrix. And so they can walk around in there or whatever, and they're doing this training, and then Morpheus is the leader guy is telling them, is like, anybody that's still in here, they're human beings, but it's like, as long as they're still plugged into the system, they're our enemy. Because the machines can jump into their bodies, like possession, can jump into their body at any time to like go out and attack them. And I was like, I know this is like the most atheistic thing ever, because I mean, it's not a spiritual thing, but I was like, what an interesting comparison to the spiritual realm that we face. It's like there's this unseen realm. We're living in this matrix on earth, but there's this unseen realm outside there that's the real world, where these battles are going on, and everybody that's still plugged into the worldly system is an enemy to a certain extent, because those spiritual battles can be taking place through them.
The spiritual battles are raging over our head all the time, and most Christians are just oblivious to it, but the battles do rage. One thing I can think of about what you're saying there is the spiritual warfare that comes about as a result of evangelism. If you can catch the heart of it, the fire, and you can get up and you start. My phone's going off here, but once you catch on to that, you become a target to the enemy. And I guarantee it, the attacks are going to come. So if you begin to step out and you begin to do evangelism, and this becomes a lifestyle to you, Satan's going to come along and he's going to plant one right between your eyes here pretty quick. And I try to remind people of this. I used to take people out on the streets, and we'd go to like homeless camps and all that kind of stuff, or on the streets, and they'd get all excited about this because every one of them would have some amazing witnessing encounter that they could testify of. And I would go back to the church and I would warn them all. I would say, now listen, you are about to get hit. Satan's going to come after you. You can expect some spiritual warfare. And they would all go, yeah, like they understood what I was talking about. And then when it happened, it caught them off guard. I mean, Satan is out to chop the legs out from underneath this before you get up and going. And so if your church starts moving in this manner, you're going to have some attacks come. And it's amazing sometimes from what direction the attacks will come from. Sometimes it's from other believers, it's from other church members. there are some churches, I promise you, I was in a situation one time, if you had given them the opportunity to vote, they would have probably voted out evangelism, because it just, I don't know what it was, but it just triggered some kind of rage in them. And I'm talking about church folks and stuff. So the attacks will come. You get out and start evangelizing, and you just stay on your guard. Pay attention to what's going on around you, because the attacks are going to come, because Satan wants to take you out before it gets any momentum going to it.
Well, he also mentions here 2 Corinthians 4, 3 through 4, but if our gospel is veiled, it is veiled to those who are perishing. In their case, the God of this age, that being Satan, has blinded the minds of unbelievers to keep them from seeing the light of the gospel, the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. And I always think about that too, because like I said, I got really into apologetics, trying to answer those questions, but I need to make sure that everyone understands apologetics is not necessarily effective evangelism. Apologetics is an answer to deflect. When they're deflecting with those questions, this is the answer to shut that question down and get them back on track. But apologetics by itself is not going to save anyone, and that's a lesson I had to learn, because no one ever. It might have been Josh McDowell said this. No one has ever come to Christ by a well-reasoned argument. And so, you can make the most logical argument in the world, but they're not going to get it, because, as 2 Corinthians 4 says, their spiritual eyes are blinded. They can't understand it. They're not going to get it. I mean, I talk to people all the time about like the abortion issue, and I'm like, to me, it's just like, this is obviously murder. It's like, I mean, it's not even a question. Why do we even have to talk about it? But then there are like people, even in the church, that are like, no, this is not, it's not an evil thing. It's just tissue. And you're like, no. And you're like, why can't you get this? Well, because they're spiritually blinded in that area, and it's like they don't get it. It's the same thing with the gospel, and like you said, when Satan knows you're working there, he's working against you. It's not. We're not going to have an easy time of this. It's war. It's war.
Good.
We have to fight for the lives and the souls of these people. And but anyway, so pray that the Holy Spirit will open their eyes to see the truth. And so, you got anything else to add? I think we've probably gone long enough.
I got to save some for session number 2.
All right. Well, we're going to stop there. That's why is it so hard for Christians to witness? And we're going to pick up next time and give you some practical applications, some practical strategies that you can hopefully put in your toolbox to go out and do personal evangelism today. And so we'll see you next time. Have a good week.